Welcome back to Pace Immigration, paceimmigration.com, talking once again with U.S. and Canadian immigration lawyer Andy Semichuk. Andy, good to see you.
Oh, great to see you too.
Some minor changes in the spousal sponsorship stuff, so I think we should just go back and do a comprehensive on spousals. So, if you wish to join your husband or wife in Canada or the United States, to and from, what's the story?
Okay, well, first the update in Canada, which is they removed the conditional spousal permanent resident card. So from now on, the spousal cases are going to be decided at the port of entry or like before the port of entry at the consulates or internally, but there will be no conditional 2-year review of the status of the spouse inside Canada. That's gone.
Okay.
All right. A friend of mine, Jim Metcalf, here at PACE, did a little blog on that. If you want more details about that, you could look that up.
Okay.
Okay, now let's deal with Canada first, and then we'll deal with the United States. So northbound to Canada from the U.S. or from outside of North America to Canada.
Yes.
2 ways. One, external through a consulate. So the process is, number 1, the Canadian spouse files a spousal sponsorship petition for the foreign spouse to come to Canada. That application goes to Mississauga, where there's a processing center near Toronto, for them to consider the sponsor. And they look at things such as, is the sponsor in jail? Were there previous applications that didn't go well? Is there a spousal support problem from a previous marriage or whatever? And criminal records, etc. And if the sponsor is okay, they approve the sponsor, and then that application goes overseas or down to the U.S. Well, in the case of the U.S., it's handled through Ottawa for processing of the spouse that's coming to Canada.
Right.
And there they look at things such as security concerns, police records, medical issues and things like that. The spouse overseas or in the U.S. will have to go through a doctor's examination and get the police clearances for every country that spouse has lived in since the age of 18 for more than 6 months.
It's a big process.
Yeah, but eventually, the consulate overseas will provide the overseas spouse with a visa in their passport, an immigrant visa in their passport that enables that spouse to come to Canada. That's kind of a very short, quick review of the process for overseas spouses.
Right.
There are instances where this can be done internally in Canada, such as when, say, a spouse is here working and gets married to a Canadian spouse. So that application could be sponsored in Canada. In that case, there's a similar process where first the sponsor is reviewed and they decide he's okay or she's okay, and then the spouse is approved inside Canada. Timing on these things, the objective is 1 year, but
reality says something a little different.
Little more, yeah.
Question I get a lot: people that are on tourist visas or visitor visas, they're in Canada, they fall in love or whatever, for whatever reason they want to marry a Canadian, and I get a question a lot through the social media channels of, should I marry him or her in Canada now and stay, or should I go overseas and then do the sponsorship that way? So if you're on a tourist visa, how does it work?
Definitely, in my view, marry the guy or the woman and stay.
Stay in Canada.
Yeah. One problem, which is if things don't go well, there's no appeal inside Canada. It's a decision, like it's a moment of truth. You're either accepted or you're not.
Yeah.
If you're overseas, you're turned down. There's an appeal process. You can go to the Immigration Appeal Division. That's the main difference between the 2 applications. But if you're in Canada visiting or as a student or working, you fall in love, you get married, definitely inside Canada. One benefit is if you're inside Canada, you can apply for a work permit.
Okay.
It takes about 6 months, but you get the work permit while you're waiting for the approval of the package. The approval may take a year and a half or whatever, but what do you care? If you got a work permit, you're living with your spouse, you're in Canada,
Right.
Things are good.
When you're overseas, that's when it starts to drag. You might not see this person for a long time.
Right.
Okay. So that's inside Canada and outside Canada. Should we turn to the United States?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. The U.S., same thing, inside the U.S. or outside the U.S. Now, the U.S. still has this conditional green card, they call it, permanent residence. And the basic gist is there, if you've married someone and it's not been at least 2 years in the marriage, they'll give you a green card, but it's conditional that you remain married for 2 years, and then only then do you get the permanent resident unconditional green card.
Okay.
But the procedure is similar inside the U.S. Let's say you marry, you fall in love with someone. Again, same story. Let's say you're a student, you fall in love, you get married, you can process internally. The U.S. is quicker in terms of getting you a work permit. It's about 3 months.
It's not
and
bad.
you can get a work permit if you're sponsored by a spouse inside the United States. The processing is slow, just like in Canada. It could be improved in the U.S. and in Canada it could be improved. But that's the way it is, a year, more than a year. But with a work permit, again, what do you care? You're with your spouse, you're working.
Same difference.
Yeah. Externally, that's where timing is really important. And if you're from Africa or let's say China or whatever, the wait periods can be really significant. There are, but the process is the same. You file a petition. That petition is approved inside the country. It's usually about 6 or so months for the petition to get approved. It then goes to the National Visa Center, which is the quarterback or coordinating organization for all the consulates worldwide.
All right.
They collect all the paperwork necessary so the approvals can be easily done at the consulates. In their collection of paperwork, they look for affidavits of support, meaning if you're a spouse sponsoring someone, you have to file an affidavit that you're going to look after them financially. There's a similar commitment in Canada where, for a certain period of time, whatever it is, 10 years or 3 years or whatever, you are responsible for this spouse's welfare in terms of economic
Right.
welfare. So you file an affidavit of support, and of course you have to be a citizen or a permanent resident to sponsor a spouse from overseas. Either country still have to have that qualification. But basically in the National Visa Center, what they do is they go through these paper requirements, affidavit of support, and then police clearance and medical clearance. You got that all cleared up, then they send the file over to the consulate for your interview. You're interviewed there, and hopefully if you can prove it's a legitimate marriage, they allow you to come into the United States.
There have been stories where people have been on the hook for people that
Yes.
have disappeared into the hinterlands of Canada or wherever they
Yes.
went,
Yeah.
and that person is now on the hook for
Right.
whatever money is owed to the government for whatever that person owed.
Yeah, I've had it both in Canada and in the United States. I had a client here in Canada, owed $50,000 for a spouse that took off one day and never showed up again, and racked up a bill with the social welfare. And he had to, he was struggling, and he had to pay it. He had
50
to pay it.
grand, eh?
Yep.
And what about in the States? What was
Same
that?
thing.
Same thing.
Same, I don't know the amount, but same kind of a deal. It's rare, but it happens.
Right.
If a flagrant violation happens where someone comes in and says, "Okay, goodbye, Charlie,"
Yes.
and racks up the bills and welfare payments and stuff like that, the government can come at you, Charlie, for making the mistake of marrying, Bonnie or whoever it was.
We usually just dispense immigration advice, but some heart advice would be just make sure it's legit.
Yeah, of
like
course.
Mail
That's the
order
key.
stuff and everything. Just be very careful of that.
Right.
But the 2-year conditional, that's gone in Canada now. It used to be
Yes.
that the spouse had to live with the sponsor for 2 years before they'd get their full permanent residency.
Right.
That is gone.
Right, but it's still in the United States.
It's still in the US.
So they could show up like at a year and a half and say, hey, are you guys living together?
Right.
Show us what kind of toothpaste does he use? What kind of underwear does she wear and stuff like that.
Right. To make sure it's
It can
legit.
happen.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me just share one last thing.
Please do.
There's a film called The Proposal,
Yes.
starring Sandra Bullock. It's an excellent film to watch for U.S. immigration and the conditional aspect of a spousal sponsorship.
It's a pretty funny movie, and
Yeah.
it goes through everything you're talking about.
Yeah.
And sure enough, the immigration people show up, and they want to
Yeah.
make sure it's legit
Yeah.
and stuff. So,
Yeah.
all right, thanks, Andy. That's Andy Semichuk. Spousal sponsorship. Contact him if you need help, and we'll talk to you next time. Bye.